Hi everyone, it's Sandy and today I'm filming my May wrap-up talking about all the books that I read in May. I know this video is going up a little bit late, but there was a lot going on towards the end of May and then a lot going on towards the beginning of June, so I finally now have the time to film. I ended up reading about 10-ish books in the month of May. I'm going to go ahead and start talking about the very first one because I know that this is going to be a semi-long video, and that book is Want by Cindy Pon. This book is set in Taipei in an alternate future. The world is heavily polluted and there have been these suits created to protect people from the pollution. However, these suits can only be afforded by those who are really wealthy, and the book follows Jason, who is unable to afford this suit and is struggling to survive. Jason and his friends are determined to destroy this corporation that's producing these special suits that only the wealthy can afford, and along the way he meets this girl named Dayu and he falls for her, but she also happens to be the daughter of the CEO of the corporation. I ended up rating this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I thought the concept of the story was really interesting. Pollution is an environmental issue that we face today, and I really liked how this book tackled that issue along with the political issues that come with it. However, I didn't like the romance of the story, and I also didn't like the pacing of it. As an individual, I did really like Dayu's character. She's the love interest, but the development of the romance between her and Jason just felt really forced, and also the transition from scene to scene just felt very choppy. It didn't feel like it flowed seamlessly. This isn't a very long book, as you can see by how thin it appears, but in the middle I felt like the story dragged. I did really enjoy the group dynamics in this book. I read reviews where others have compared this group to being similar to the Six of Crows group, and I can definitely see why, because these characters are trying to infiltrate this corporation and trying to destroy it. I did really like the aspect of the story and seeing these characters interact with one another. So just a side note, all the characters in this book are Asian, but we have different Asian representations. For example, we have an Indian main character, we have a Chinese main character, there's also a Filipino main character, and there's also a female romance in this book. So overall, I rated this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished is one that I actually listened to on audiobook, and that book is called People Like Us by Mele. This book mostly takes place at a private school, and it centers around this girl named Kay Donovan. She's a star soccer player, she's part of the popular crowd, but one day she and her group of friends find a dead body in a lake, and soon she receives an email to go on this type of scavenger hunt from the girl who had died. The story goes from there, and overall I thought the story was just alright. I like that there is a little bit of diversity in this book. Before picking this book up, I didn't really hear much about it. I didn't know that it had LGBT plus representation. There is a female side character who's in a relationship with another girl, and although labels aren't explicitly used, I believe the main character is bisexual. The story kind of had this Pretty Little Liars vibe because the main character is being sent to do things by the girl who had died, but I didn't like where the story went. I just thought it was so underwhelming by the very end. It felt like the author was trying to have this conclusion be like very shocking, but I didn't find it shocking at all. I just thought it was so underwhelming. I did enjoy listening to how the story was unraveling and how bits and pieces of the mystery were coming together, but overall I didn't love it, so I ended up rating this book a 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read is also another book that I listened to an audiobook, and that is American Panda by Gloria Chao. This book follows a Taiwanese main character who is a freshman in college, and she is studying to become a doctor. However, she hates germs and she doesn't even want to become a doctor. She's only doing it because her parents expect that of her, and she does not want to be disowned for disobeying them. So throughout this book, she struggles between doing what she wants or being miserable and doing what her parents want. So there's this stereotype about Asian parents being super strict that I've always heard about growing up. So reading this book from the experiences that I've had growing up in a Chinese and Vietnamese household where my parents are super chill, it was kind of a strange experience reading the story because there are definitely aspects in May's life that I can relate to, but her relationship with her parents is very different than my relationship with my parents. And so listening to this book, I just felt so suffocated being in May's point of view, hearing everything that her mother wants her to do and how controlling her parents can be. May's mom is so demanding and she's always on May's case, wanting to know everything that's going on in her life and wanting to know where she's at all times. I really enjoyed seeing the development of May's relationship with her family members and also with the love interest. I also really like seeing how certain things changed by the very end. While I loved the Asian representation in the story, I just felt like the overall story wasn't compelling enough, so I ended up giving this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished is Truly Devious by Maureen. This book takes place in a boarding school in Vermont, and shortly after this boarding school opened, the wife and daughter of the founder of the school were kidnapped. The only real clue to this kidnapping was a riddle that was signed Truly Devious. This case ended up becoming unsolved, and so it's now taking place many years later in the present, following our main character Stevie, who is a true crime aficionado, and she is determined to solve this code case. I really like the mystery aspect in the story, and I love the overall concept of it, but for a good chunk of the story it would switch between past and present, and I really enjoyed reading the past chapters more, and in the present chapters I just felt like there was nothing happening. Really, it was just introducing us to the characters and to Ellingham Academy, but those chapters just weren't interesting enough to keep me very engaged, and so I felt like the present chapters just really dragged and made the story drag as well. I really liked the past chapters because it was revealing everything that led up to the kidnapping and some of the events that happened after the kidnapping. The story definitely picked up within the last 25% of the book. There is going to be a second book, and I look forward to reading that. I'm not sure how many books are in the series, but overall I would rate this book a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished is Leah on the Offbeat by Becky Albertalli. This is basically a companion novel to Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda, but the story is told through Leah's perspective. I really enjoyed Leah's character in Simon vs., and she was a character that I really wanted to know more about. So when I found out that she was getting her own novel, I was super excited. A lot of people mentioned not really liking Leah as much in this book, but I still really enjoyed her character. There were definitely some aspects about her character that I didn't enjoy as much, but one thing for sure, I really enjoyed her snarky and sarcastic comments. Also, Leah is bisexual, but that is something that her friends don't know. The only person that knows is her mom. There are a couple scenes in this book that could be potentially harmful or hurtful in terms of the bisexual representation. If you would like to know more about that, I will leave a link to an Own Voices review in the description box below. Leah's mom does have a big presence in this book. I really enjoyed that this mother-daughter relationship is not perfect. I really loved how supportive her mom was, but one thing I didn't like about this relationship portrayal was how mean Leah was to her mom. I just felt like her mom was the kindest, sweetest woman ever, and Leah was just being so rude and disrespectful to her at times, and I really wish there was a scene in this book where Leah acknowledges her behavior and apologizes for it, but I don't think we ever got that. And another thing I don't like about this book is that Leah kept stringing along Garrett, who is a character that has a crush on Leah, but Leah doesn't really have a crush on him, and she just kept stringing him along, and it just made my heart hurt for him because he really cared about her and he is a really kind guy, but she wasn't telling him that she wasn't interested. I just felt so bad for him, and it went on for a good chunk of the book. I really liked where things left off in the book, but I'm more iffy about all the events that led up to that particular ending. I just didn't really like the timing of things. But overall, I still really enjoyed the book. I like that it took place during their senior year of high school, and I really like seeing all the characters we fell in love with in the first book. Overall, I rated this book a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished is Ramona Blue by Julie Murphy. I also listened to this book on audiobook, and I really enjoyed the narrator for this audiobook, so if you haven't read this book, I would definitely recommend listening to it. The story takes place in a small town in Mississippi, and it follows our main character Ramona, who lives in a trailer with her sister and her dad. The story takes place over the course of a year, in particular her senior year of high school. In the beginning of the book, we have this character named Freddie who moves back to town, who used to be one of Ramona's good friends. Ramona is sure that she likes girls, but as she's spending more time with Freddie, she begins to develop feelings for him, and that causes her to question her sexual identity. I didn't expect to love this book as much as I did. I love that it was very character driven. I felt like I really got to know the characters, and the story didn't feel slow, it didn't feel rushed. The overall pacing was just really great, and I love seeing Ramona's relationship with her family. Her dad is working all the time to make ends meet. Her sister is pregnant. Her mom is rarely ever in the picture. I love Julie Murphy's portrayal of these different types of family relationships. I haven't read many books where the character grew up poor, and that is something Ramona struggles with throughout the book. I also really love the friendships in this book and the different representations that are included. Freddie identifies as being straight, he's black, he comes from a middle-class family, and I really like that Freddie and Ramona have this history together of being childhood best friends, and I liked seeing them spending time together at the pool. I thought it was really great having Ramona fall in love with swimming. There are also other side characters with different sexual identities. Some of these characters are comfortable with their sexuality while some are still figuring it out. And I also really like the discussion about labels in this book. I love when friendships turn into a relationship, and I thought that was executed super well in this book. I don't think this is a story about a girl who finds the right guy that turns her straight, but instead it's about sexual fluidity, which is something that we rarely ever see in YA books. Throughout the book, Ramona never identifies as being straight, and she also never stops liking girls. She repeats that several times throughout the book. Overall, I thought this was a really great book. I ended up rating it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I finished is one that I've been wanting to read forever, and that is Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. The author often describes it as Black Panther, but with magic. This story is about a girl who is fighting to bring magic back to her people with the help of her brother and a rogue princess. There is so much hype surrounding this book, and I was really scared going into it because I thought I wasn't going to like it very much, but I ended up really loving this story. I thought the writing was beautiful. There's a perfect balance of action scenes, of romance, of character interactions. Everything about this book was just so well constructed. I really enjoyed learning about the different types of magic in this book. This book is over 500 pages, but I read through it really quickly. The only thing I do have to say that I didn't love about this book is the romance between Zaylee and another character. I felt like the romance happened very suddenly and it felt kind of forced. Overall, I ended up rating this book a 5 out of 5 stars because it was great and I can't wait to read the next one. The next book that I finished is The Way You Make Me Feel by Maureen. This book follows Clara, who is a prankster, and she ends up pulling this prank that had some negative consequences, and as a punishment, her dad forces her to work at his Korean-Brazilian food truck for the summer. This was a super fun, cute, fluffy contemporary book. I loved that it revolves around a food truck, and as much as I love the enemies to lover trope, I also really enjoy the enemies to friends trope. Not only does Clara have to work at her dad's food truck, but she also has to work with Rose, who is a person that she really does not like. So I really enjoyed the interactions between Clara and Rose and seeing this friendship develop between the two of them. I also thought Clara's family dynamic was really interesting to read about. Her parents are currently divorced, and they had her when they were about 18 years old. Both of her parents are Korean, but they were born in Brazil and immigrated to the US, and so now Clara is living with her dad in LA. Her dad is the owner of a food truck and her mom is a social media influencer. Maureen is the author of I Believe in a Thing Called Love, which I have read and really love, so I was looking forward to reading another book written by her. That book had a really great father-daughter relationship, and I really enjoyed seeing that similar thing in this book as well. I didn't love the romance in this book, but I still thought it was super cute. I also really liked that there wasn't that much tension and angst surrounding this romance. Overall, this was a really great summer read. It's definitely one of those fluffy and light contemporary books, but it still has depth to the story, and so overall I would rate this book a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read is actually a book that I was sent by an author, and it's actually not a full book. I was only sent the first chapter, which is like the first part in the book, so it's like 100 pages or so, and usually I would have said no to this request, but the synopsis of the story and the main character really intrigued me, so I said yes and I read it, and I'm talking about it now. The book is called Memory of Mother, and it's written by Valveli. This book follows a woman who is transported 30 years into the past. I really like time travel stories, and so the synopsis of this book was really interesting. The protagonist in the story is Vietnamese, and that is pretty much the main reason why I said yes to reading this book, because I've never read a book with a Vietnamese main character. Now that the main character is 30 years in the past, she seeks out her mother to basically help figure things out. I really wish we did get to see more Vietnamese culture incorporated throughout this book. It's mentioned that the characters do speak Vietnamese to one another, but the story isn't written in Vietnamese, the dialogue isn't written in Vietnamese, so anyone that can read English can read the story. One thing I didn't enjoy very much about the story is the format. It's written in a screenplay format, and I just felt like it didn't work very well for the story. Based on my calculations, the main character should be about 41 years old because she is transported 30 years in the past and she meets her 11-year-old self, but the thought process and the dialogue of the main character just felt so childish. There were a lot of repeated phrases and words and an excessive use of ellipses. Typically, ellipses are 3 periods, but sometimes the author would use 5 periods, 7 periods. I don't know, it just seemed very random and sporadic. The dialogue of all of the characters in general just felt very forced and unnatural. Another thing that bothered me in the story was the use of the word puff, and that word puff is in asterisk, so it would be like an action the character is doing, but I don't understand what puff means. means. What does that mean? The character would puff? Like, is that like a blow of breath? It just felt really weird reading it because I didn't understand what the character was doing, and it was used a lot in the book. The ending of the story definitely took an unexpected turn. I really like that it doesn't leave the reader with a complete cliffhanger, but it still leaves you with questions and intrigued in wanting to know what happens next. I do think the story overall was definitely really interesting, but the whole format and the writing of it just didn't mesh well with me. So overall, I would rate this story a 2.5 out of 5 stars. And the very last book that I finished in May is In the After by Demitria Lunetta. I also listened to this book on audiobook, and this is a book that I've known about for a really long time, but it's only now that I'm picking it up because I heard Trina from Between Chapters talking about it, and I'm really glad that I did because I really enjoyed this book. This book has a very similar premise to The Fifth Wave by Rick Yancey, but I think it's better than The Fifth Wave. So it basically takes place in a post-apocalyptic world where aliens have invaded and lots of people have died, and the main character is trying to survive. And one thing that I really enjoyed about this story is that these alien creatures are attracted and triggered by sound. So the main character has to live in this world of silence. There's also a side character who's a lot younger than the main character, and they're living in this house together, and they communicate using their own version of sign language. The story is a really quick and fast-paced read. I really love the world in this book, and I really enjoyed reading the main character and seeing her relationship with this younger character, which is basically like a sister relationship. Once the story gets to part 2, it switches between 4 months in the future and to the present, and so once it was switching back and forth from past to present, the timeline kind of got confusing, especially since I listened to the audiobook. It's not explicitly said that it's now in the future or it's now in the past. In the physical book, there could be section breaks that would make it easier to distinguish, but in the audiobook, it's not like that because you can't visualize it. So sometimes the narrator would narrate in the present chapters, but I would think it's the future chapter, so the timeline kind of got confusing. But overall, I really enjoyed this book. I think it's very underrated, and I'm glad that I finally picked it up. I believe it's a duology as well, so I hope to get to the second and final book sometime this summer. I ended up rating this book a 4 out of 5 stars. Those are all of the books that I read in the month of May. If you read any of the books that I mentioned, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Bye!